One of the globally renowned Chinese electric vehicle brands, widely recognized by most, has issued a stark warning about an impending crisis in China's automotive industry.
What's lurking beneath the surface of China's EV empire? Are we witnessing a power struggle worthy of a blockbuster movie, or just a shocking marketing ploy? Strap yourselves in because things are about to get shockingly interesting. One of the most famous Chinese electric car brands in the world, most people have actually heard of this company, has said that there is about to be a sea of blood in the automotive industry in China. A rival EV car company has said the Chinese government needs to act now to basically force some of these automakers to join together. Otherwise, there's going to be bankruptcies all over the place. Is there really going to be a sea of blood in the Chinese automotive industry? Yes, it does seem that major upheaval and consolidation is coming to the Chinese EV market. With 91 different electric car manufacturers currently operating in China, many experts believe this is an unsustainable number that will inevitably lead to widespread bankruptcies and acquisitions in the near future. One of those 91 EV companies has already essentially gone bankrupt. They fired almost their entire staff and ceased production within a matter of weeks, despite previously being considered one of the most luxurious EV brands in China. This sudden collapse shows just how precarious the situation is for many of these EV startups. The CEO of Xpeng, one of the more successful Chinese EV makers, has claimed that a sea of blood is inevitable for the next 12 months due to the intense competition and oversaturation of brands in the market. He stated that the Chinese government needs to step in and force consolidation through mergers and acquisitions, as too many companies are sustaining heavy losses that can't continue. The main factors driving the fierce competition and oversaturation in China's EV industry stem from a perfect storm of incentives and opportunities that catalyzed a wave of new startups over the past decade. First and foremost, generous government subsidies and policies explicitly designed to accelerate EV adoption inadvertently encouraged an overwhelming 91 different manufacturers to jump into the market and chase those incentives. Even more fuel was added to the fire from the explosive consumer demand for EVs in China, which surpassed even the most optimistic projections and attracted a relentless stream of new companies seeking to capitalize on the booming growth opportunity. With visions of following in Tesla's footsteps, a vast number of upstarts piled into the EV market based on sky-high sales forecasts. Additionally, the barriers to entry for Chinese EV startups were relatively low compared to the traditional auto industry, with access to part suppliers, plug-and-play production facilities, and eager investment funding from speculators enticed by the EV growth story. It became relatively straightforward for new players to gain a foothold and fuel the oversaturation. Compounding the issue, local protectionist policies in certain Chinese provinces essentially created a patchwork of small regional monopolies and fiefdoms for hometown EV brands, further fragmenting the market into a maze of niche competitors. With political capital and jobs on the line, provincial governments had strong incentives to back their local EV startups to the hilt. Finally, a core undercurrent throughout has been national pride and the desire to foster domestic EV champions on the global stage. This dynamic added an extra layer of support and subsidies for EV upstarts from provincial governments seeking to lay claim to the next automotive powerhouse within China's borders, exacerbating the supply glut. The combination of all these factors, state incentives, demand boom, low barriers, local protectionism, and nationalistic ambition, created a veritable gold rush that flooded the Chinese EV market with far too many players chasing the same prize. And as demand has cooled and the boom has faded, this vast oversupply has set the stage for the coming sea of blood, as the weakest contestants inevitably get culled. With so many competitors pursuing the same opportunity amid a gold rush mentality, oversaturation became inevitable. Now that the market is maturing, profit pressures are mounting and consolidation looms. How are the major automakers responding to this situation? The established international automakers like Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, and the major Chinese state-owned companies are using aggressive pricing tactics to try to squeeze out the weaker startups and gain EV market share dominance. Reports indicate these major brands have been offering massive 50% or more discounts on their latest EVs in China, even extending these fire sale prices to their own employees in an attempt to spark demand. While this is hemorrhaging money in the short term, their goal seems to be applying extreme pricing pressure that the startup EV companies simply cannot sustain long term. The largest automaker, BYD, has been particularly cutthroat, rapidly rolling out new EV models at lower and lower price points each quarter. With their vast resources and battery and production scale advantages, BYD seems determined to relentlessly undercut any rivals until a wave of failures and consolidation unfolded. Additionally, as competition intensifies in the maturing Chinese market, automakers across the board are accelerating their export efforts to smaller and less contested international markets. Chinese EV exports to regions like Southeast Asia, South America, and Middle East, and even plans for factories in Mexico and Europe, have ramped up dramatically just in the past year. The pressure from established giants like BYD and Volkswagen, combined with the frenetic international expansion of Chinese upstarts, starts, reinforces the consensus that a bloody shakeout is inevitable in the years ahead. What role could battery costs play in this shakeout? Battery costs have long been one of the biggest obstacles to EV affordability and profitability. However, this factor could soon shift dramatically in favor of the automakers pursuing an aggressive EV strategy. The world's largest battery maker, CATL, based in China, recently announced plans to cut battery pack costs by an astonishing 50% by the end of 2023. If achieved, this could make EVs materially cheaper to produce than internal combustion engine or ICE vehicles for the first time in history. Currently, battery packs make up 30 to 45% of the total cost for EVs. But if CATL's cost-cutting goals are realized, that percentage could drop to just 20% or less of the total vehicle cost. Given how expensive gasoline engines and transmissions are, this would allow EVs to finally undercut the manufacturing costs of comparable ICE models. Such a disruption would be an absolute game-changer. It would not only make affordable EVs a reality for the mass market, finally shifting the financial equation in favor of EVs, but it would also leave legacy automakers like Toyota, Ford, GM, and others heavily invested in ICE vehicles at a severe cost disadvantage against EV-focused competitors. This looming battery cost disruption adds even more urgency for traditional automakers to double down on EVs now, while further pressuring smaller EV startups without the scale or funds to adapt to such a drastically changing landscape. It could very well pour gasoline on the bonfire of bankruptcies and consolidation that analysts expect in the Chinese EV market over the next few years. Were there any warning signs that this oversaturation was becoming a problem? Yes, there were absolutely red flags and concerns raised about the unsustainable level of new EV companies and models flooding the Chinese market, even well before we reached the current dire outlook of a sea of blood shakeout. As early as 2018, auto industry analysts were sounding the alarm that too many deep-pocketed players were piling in based on wildly optimistic expectations and a fear of missing out. In particular, the speed at which new EV startups were launching, over 20 new brands hit the market each year from 2018 to 2020, quickly outpaced realistic consumer demand. It became overwhelmingly clear that the market was becoming saturated beyond the point of being able to sustain so many competitors long-term. Exacerbating the issue, many of these new EV makers were rushing out vastly overlapping and replicated models in the same segments, making it nearly impossible to differentiate or gain market traction. Established players like BYD, Xpeng, and others were also aggressively expanding their lineups, leaving an unprecedented glut of very similar EV sedans, SUVs, and crossovers vying for the same pool of buyers. So, while the depth of the current sea of blood was not necessarily foreseen, it was evident even years ago that a reckoning and consolidation was inevitable if the pace of new competitors kept rapidly outstripping realistic market demand and piling on overcapacity. How does this level of oversaturation in EVs compare to past disruptions in other industries? The degree of oversaturation we've witnessed unfold in China's EV market is actually quite reminiscent of other game-changing technological disruptions that previously upended entire industries and ushered in episodic boom and bust cycles among the early pioneers and startups. The current sea of blood has echoes of past excessive investment frenzies. And that's a wrap on our electrifying journey through the drama-filled world of China's EV giants. If you've enjoyed the ride, hit subscribe and ring the bell for more shocking updates. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay charged.